All right, so we're doing a class called Vedic Christianity, and we're studying a book called The Practice of the Presence of God, which is the writings and thoughts and teachings of a Christian monk named Brother Lawrence, a very humble man who, in a very simple way, realized God in the true sense, lived his life in the presence of the beloved. Now, I want to take a minute here to kind of frame this class because quite often we get some concerned folks in the comments that are thinking that I'm absconding with Vedantic thought and attributing it to Christianity, or that I'm somehow trying to negate the history and relationship between Christianity and Hinduism. I couldn't care less about something like that. What we're doing here is manifesting and using the idea of the unity of religions. Sri Ramakrishna says directly that the Sanatana Dharma, this eternal religion, contains all paths and all forms of worship, including God with form and God without form. And so in that unity of religion, I'm taking away the boundaries and using the scriptures of all the world's religions, the ideals of all the world's teachers, to elucidate one another very much in the way that we do in secular studies. You know, we don't isolate mathematics by who discovered what or who thought what or who found what way of, doing division or multiplication, and that we can't use that in this mathematics. You see, we use the teachings and understandings of all mathematicians to add to the central knowledge of the whole and to move forward. So that's what Vedic Christianity is. It's basically a class. I myself am a Vedantic monk, but the class itself is for Christians, for people who believe in Christ and are following that ideal, but who also want to broaden and deepen their understanding. Now, to some Christians, that might be a blasphemous thing to say, that we could deepen something from the scriptures, but I can tell you experientially, it's easily done. Deepening Christianity is an easy task these days. And so we're using the teachings from some of the world's oldest scriptures and some of the most highly recognized and revered spiritual teachers to help us more deeply understand the message of the Christ, who is in the company of the avatars, in the company of the incarnations of God. And, there is one incarnation of God, and he has come many times according to the oldest scriptures in the world. Any time that the world gets out of balance and, selfishness begins to reign with lust and greed taking the fore, God manifests, incarnates herself, himself, that self, in order to elucidate our understanding and to help us find our way back to a healthy and blissful existence and life, a life of meaning. So we're on the aphorisms or the maxims of Brother Lawrence, which is the teachings, kind of free from the letters and the essays. Now we're just looking at blocks of teaching. And we're looking at the section called Means for Attaining the Presence of God. How did he get to live in the constant presence of God? To the point that he said that he felt such an inner joy and an inner bliss that he had to come up with ways of masking it, because he would literally just go into these ecstatic states because he was keenly, vividly, really in the presence of God, not in an imaginary sort of way, but in a way that takes a great deal of discipline. So the first one, the first means for attaining the presence of God, he says, is a great purity of life. Now, quite often this word purity, it's thrown out in a puritanical sort of way, and it's become offensive or something that people crinkle their nose at, as being some, goody two-shoes way of living. That's not the purity he's talking about. The purity he's talking about in spiritual life, it's a life that's free of me and mine, an unselfish life, a life that's lived out of love for everyone, for everything, for every being, sentient and non-sentient. It's learning to see that divine image within yourself, that divine presence, learning to identify with it, sort it out from ego, sort it out from, body, mind, and understand its nature of love and wisdom and existence, and to set your sense of self in that space where there is no need, because your love is infinite, because your wisdom is infinite. And it comes from that heart center, from the very middle of our being. And so we set up that inner shrine there, in the teachings of St. John of the Cross, the bridal chamber, where the consummation between Christ and the spiritual seeker will happen at that moment of enlightenment, that moment of union. The second, he says, is a great faithfulness in the practice of his presence. So it's really that real focus to gaze upon God with a humility, with a longing love, much like a golden retriever will look up at its owner as he scratches its chin. Learn to recognize the scratches on your chin from the beloved and learn to look up with those eyes of endearing love. And so a great faithfulness in that, not being concerned about your faults, not paying attention to your failures, but always paying attention to this unlimited grace of this image of the beloved that is your life, that is the energy that keeps you alive. It's your existence, this very being. It's your ability to feel and give love. It's your ability to know and to learn. That is the proof of the presence of the divine within you. The third one is to take care that you begin your actions, continue them, and finish them with an inward lifting of the heart to God, to the divine. That's to understand that this is not something we're accomplishing or adding to ourselves, or it's not a means of getting something. It's a means of realization, which is an understanding of the presence of God, which has always been and will always be, and our relationship to that. What is life? What is it for? And who are you? These are the questions we're looking at. And so in that, we're not trying to be anything more than what we are. We're actually trying to return to what we are. That pure sense of self that's not a story of an ego and a story of particulars in a life, a succession of changing things. It's what is your nature, what is unchanging about you. Go to that center in you that has been watching your mind, listening to your ears, talking through your mouth, looking through your eyes, tasting through your tongue. Go to that place where all of that information is coming to you, and understand that you are separate and apart from them, that you are this witness. And lift that up to God. Understand that you already have what you're seeking, you just haven't realized it. You're looking around the house for your cell phone and it's in your back pocket. So at the beginning and ending of all of our practice, we lift ourselves up to the divine with the assumption of presence, the assumption of purity, the assumption of love, unconditioned, deep, profound, beautiful love. And we let that inspire us to our real nature. He says it's helpful for those who undertake this practice, as number 4, to say, my God, I am wholly thine. O God of love, I love you with all my heart. Care must be taken that the mind does not wander and return again to the senses, to the world, to ignorance, to the particulars. We keep our mind in the presence of love, a love that's general, a love that's unconditioned, a love that's pure. And we do that by continually calling ourselves back to that noiseless inner space that is our own being, by continually reminding ourselves of this presence and of this nature, and not getting caught up in the world of change, but staying in that changeless center within. And number 5, this is where we left off, so this is where we begin today's class. He says, this practice of the presence of God is not easy at the outset. Why isn't it easy? Because we've got hundreds of bad habits doing the opposite, right? We've got millions of gods in our mind that we go and worship. When we're lonely, we call up a friend. When we're bored, we go to the movies. When we're, anxious, we go get a drink. So we have all of these little mini worships that we do for all of the different notions in our life, the different things that we feel like we have to take care of, instead of going within and solving them in the presence of our nature, in the presence of God within. So it's not easy at the beginning, not because it's not easy, because after all we're trying to do is be what we are in a pure, authentic, absolutely sincere and earnest way. That there's no pretense about us, no holier than thou nonsense about us. that we love and we serve and we care and we're concerned, and we're given our life to the manifestation of a pure love, to the manifestation of a pure wisdom, and a very deep and profound experience of existing, of being here. So it's not easy at the outset, but if persevered with, it produces imperceptibly wonderful works in the soul. Yes, you will watch yourself unfold and become like a Buddha, like a Jesus, like a Rama, like a Krishna, like a Ramakrishna. That you will witness this happen as you comb your soul with the comb of love, the comb of the presence of the divine. It draws down from the Lord an abundance of grace, which is necessary because these habits are hard to break. And you have to continually have faith in the knowledge that you are a divine image of God, of the beloved, this divinity. And this grace, this pouring down of grace, is an understanding that the nature of the universe is positive. The nature of the universe is to bring you to realization, to bring you to the highest experience of love. And the suffering that we go through is because the universe is teaching us that we're attached to something temporary, something that's not of our nature, that we're doing something counter to love and wisdom. And so the suffering of life is constantly the universe itself trying to nudge us in the right direction. And this abundance of grace in the universe, look at how broad of a spectrum everything gets to work together in a perfect way. You know, see how this unity is brought about in such a gentle spirit of service as everything works together to be what it is. It draws down from the Lord an abundance of grace and leads insensibly, without explanation. It leads to that simple gaze of love, to that sight of God's continual presence, which is the most holy, the most real, and the most simple, the most fruitful kind of prayer. And so the beauty of this is this seems, for those at the beginning of the path, the presence of God, it seems so child bookish, oh, my big imaginary friend in the sky. And that's because it is kind of childish to view God that way, but we do in the beginning, and that's fine, and it's beautiful. Very soon, though, we find that God is much more infinite, much more intimate than the Michelangelo picture of him, naked in the sky, reaching down a finger to touch his creation. That really, there's a oneness here. Again, that your existence is God, that the love that dwells in you, that is able to recognize love, that is able to produce love, is God. And that wisdom, that knowledge, that intelligence within you, that which is able to make sense of what your senses say to it, that is the presence of God within. And it has been so steady, and it has been so constant, and it is such a given in our lives that we've completely discounted it. We like to pay attention. Actually, we're geared and built to pay attention to the changing, to be attracted to the changing. You can sit there and watch that sunset on the beach in California, and you'll find that you've got this infinite sunset in front of you, this beautiful star setting down behind the horizon of the planet, and the beautiful colors and the wonders of another day coming to a close. And some dirty McDonald's bag will come blowing down the beach, and where will your eyes go? You will actually move your eyes off of this delightful scene of beauty in front of you to watch a bag blow down the beach, because we're geared to look toward the changing, and we have long ago forgotten the gaze of the divine, the presence of love within us, as we've become defined by actions, defined by temporary things that have not always been true. And so it's a return to the real you. Number 6, he says, notice, if you please, that to attain this state, the control of the senses is taken for granted. It is impossible for a soul inordinately fond of earthly things to find complete joy in the presence of God, for to be with the Creator, it is necessary absolutely to give up the creature. This is not often very popular because most of us are very attached to pleasure and enjoyment in the world, and we don't want it taken away, so we have a defensiveness about it. But that's because of ignorance. We don't realize that behind them lies a more lasting, a deeper, and more honest experience of bliss, of joy, of the gladness of life. And so he's saying, in order to see God, you have to take your eyes off of the changing. All of our senses are tuned to the changing world that happens in mind. But there's a you in there that's watching mind, that comes before mind, which means it comes before personality, before ego. And we have to learn to become aware of that self. That self can't exist in the mind. You can't think about that self. You can't put that self in front of the senses in order to study it, which is why it's difficult to learn, because every time we think we need to learn something, we always go to the senses. We read something, we look at something, we try an experiment of something, which is a combination of the senses, And we formulate something in the mind, and that is what worldly knowledge, secular knowledge, is about. But this knowing is deeper than intuition. This knowing is not a collection of facts and a mountain or castle of thinking. This is a profound sense of being that contains all knowledge, that contains all experience, that is the universal mind. And so that is what we're trying to touch. And so to touch that universal self, we have to let go of the particular self. We have to let go of the small stuff. If you're standing there looking through a set of binoculars at the horizon, you can't see your friends and family standing directly around you. Your eyes are on the horizon. So it's very much like that, but in reverse, really. We've got to take our eyes off of the surroundings and pay attention to the distant. We've got to take the binoculars off and pay attention to the present, okay, for the sake of that story, that example. Take the binoculars off your eyes and become aware of what's around you. And so that's what we're doing. We're taking our eyes off of the changing, off of the myriad of thoughts in the mind, and becoming a singular ear, tuning everything intuitively toward that which is listening, toward that which is watching the mind, toward that which is unchanging within, that eye of I that has been there when your body was radically different at the age of 2, and will be there when your body is radically different at the age when you die. What is that continuity of self in there? That is the presence of God. And that's what we're going to. That's what we're going for. So we have to take our eyes off of the changing and go to that which does not change within us. Once we identify it, once we find it. So he says, notice, if you please, that to attain this state, the control of the senses is taken for granted, the removing of your interest from the changing. It is impossible for a soul inordinately fond of earthly things to find complete joy in the presence of God. If you're delighting in the senses, fine. The only problem with it is that it's temporary, and it takes more and more and more to make the enjoyment equal to the previous experience. Smell it. Learn this lesson one simple way. Smell a rose, and then smell it immediately a second time, and smell it a third time. And I guarantee you by the 5th time, you won't be smelling that rose anymore. The body adjusts. Have 1 cup of coffee. It won't be long before you're having to drink 2 or 3 to get the same effect, right? That's how these drug overdoses happen. You take your first whatever, and there's a great joy in it. But the next time it takes a little bit more. There's a little bit less contentment in it. And it takes more and more and more until your life becomes about the pleasure you pursue. And when that happens, it's very hard to come out of that. It's very hard to break those habits. And so he's telling us, take your eyes off the changing. Understand all that it can give you is only a distraction. It cannot actually give you anything that lasts. Everything that lasts is deep within you, hidden behind the mind, behind your personality, behind your ego. It is impossible for a soul inordinately fond of earthly things to find complete joy in the presence of God, for to be with the Creator, it is necessary absolutely to give up the created, to give up the creature. There's a couple of ways of doing this, and they're both forms of renunciation. But one of the things Vivekananda says, he was talking about image worship in the temple. He says, if you worship the image and stop at the image, that you think the image is God, that produces karma. It doesn't produce freedom. It doesn't produce the realization we're looking for. He says that'll get you to a heaven, but it won't put you in that knowledge of self. He says when you worship an image, look through the image at God. Understand that the image itself is not God, but that it's something you look through to see God. And there's a great teaching in that all the enjoyments of this world don't stop at the object that you think is giving you enjoyment, because it's not. All enjoyment in this world is a manifestation of that inner bliss, which is your nature, and it only comes when desire ceases. So when you fulfill a desire, it's not that fulfillment of the desire that actually gives you bliss or gives you joy. We think that, right? Because we live in the mind. But what is actually happening is that when you fulfill that desire, for just a moment you are without desire. And in that moment when you are without desire, your natural bliss becomes apparent to you. And that's the joy that gets fulfilled with desires. But what happens then is as soon as you've taken care of one desire, for a brief period you enjoy being free of desire, and then the next desire sweeps in to put your mind on discontentment. And you have to begin that whole hunt again for finding your pleasure, for finding your joy. But if you know, or if you're a knower, you know that that joy is coming from within you, not from an object in the senses. It's coming from within you. And if you can take your eyes off the object and look through it at the indication of the presence of God that object brings, that's the secret to letting go of the object and holding on to the bliss that is your nature, that is always there. All right, so he jumps in now to a new section, which is called The Benefits of the Presence of God, which, as if we would have to really list that. But here they are, in case we don't know what the benefits of this divine presence would be or is within us. The first benefit, he says, which the soul receives from the presence of God, is that faith becomes more alive and active in every side of life, particularly in the times of need, since it obtains for us grace in temptation and in our dealings with one another. For the soul, accustomed by this practice to rely on faith, seeing and feeling God present, is able to call upon him freely and with confidence, and to obtain that of which she is in need. One may say that faith enables the soul to approach the state of the blessed. The more she advances, the more living does faith become, and at last it becomes so quickened that the soul can almost say, I no longer believe, for I can see and experience. Now, this is absolutely the benefit of knowing God, is to have that strength of experience. God should not remain a matter of faith in your life. Faith is necessary at the beginning, but at some point you begin to see and understand. The clarity of mind comes to such that you can experience God, not as an imagination. You see, in this world, everything that we've produced, every city, every building, every school, every monument, every piece of art began as imagination. There is a great power in imagination. Quite often we think, oh, God is imaginary. He's got your imaginary friend. It's a silly thing. Imagination's for children. But it is imagination that gives birth to all created things. What you think, you become. And Swami Vivekananda said a very important thing. He said, stop seeking God and start seeing him, which is to say you've never seen anything else but God. You've simply given him multiple forms and multiple names. Names like martini, names like winning, all these things that seem like enjoyable goals to reach in life, they all come from the divine. They all come from your nature, and they're all trying to describe that inner nature. But you have become convinced that they are things in and of themselves, when they are really only reflections of the divinity within you. Number 2, he says, the practice of the presence of God strengthens us in hope. Right, that there is something more to this world than just the combinations of 5. What do I mean by that? You've got 5 senses. Everything you do in a day is just a combination of 5 senses. How long are you going to be infatuated with just 5 senses? How much is there beyond the senses? How many senses are there that we don't have? We've already created several machines that can sense things that we don't have senses to feel or to see. How many hundreds, thousands, maybe countless senses are there that we cannot perceive in our current state? So the practice of the presence of God gives us hope that there's more than just this combination of 5, that we don't have to spend 100 years of life tasting this, touching that, laying with that, going here, going there, seeing this, hearing that we can let go of those things which are just the same combinations over and over and over again and touch something real. Touch something deeper. Touch the very meaning and essence of your being. This is where a fulfilling life comes from. The practice of the presence of God strengthens us in this hope. Our hope grows in proportion as our knowledge and as our faith is enabled by this holy practice to penetrate these mysteries of God. In that measure, it finds in him a beauty which infinitely surpasses not only that of the bodies which we behold on earth, but also that of perfected souls and of angels. Our hope then increases and strengthens, encouraged and sustained by the magnitude of the good which it desires to enjoy, which in some sort it already savors. Yes, because all of your ability to see beauty, all of your ability to hear truth, all of your beauty, all of your ability to know love, to see love, to give love, all of your ability to think and to find knowledge and truth is because of this divine presence within you. And it's the ideal toward which everything is moving. It's funny because today we've sort of positioned evolution as being a worldly, anti-religious thing, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's actually, it could be seen from a perspective anyway, as an evidence of a perfected, unchanging ideal. Because evolution suggests an ideal. It suggests a perfection toward which everything is moving. What is that perfection? That perfection is the unchanging absolute. That perfection is God, that divinity, with or without form. That highest ideal is what we see in a beautiful person, because we see them reflecting more clearly for some reason. It's different for different beholders, but we see according to our ability to see. And ultimately, for a realized soul, everybody is overwhelmingly beautiful because that presence of God is witnessed in everyone. And so love incarnate becomes the reality of the enlightened soul, the person that has in fact learned to live and to see the divine in everything, in everyone. Number 3, hope imbues the will with a contempt for the world and inflames it with the desire, inflames it with the fire of divine love. God's love is a consuming fire which burns to ash whatever is contrary to it, and the soul thus kindled can live only in the presence of God, that presence which inspires within the heart a holy ardor, a sanctified eagerness, a veritable passion to see God loved, known, served, and worshipped by all creatures. This love, this contempt of the world, it's not a hating of the world. It's not a proactive anything. It's not an active, I hate the world. What it is if you sit there and you've got, your least favorite food on the plate, and your favorite food on the plate, you don't dislike either one of them, but you're going to go with zest for the good food on the plate, for your favorite dish. And so in that sense, you're leaving the other behind because you're moving toward the higher, the more desirable. And so once you begin on the spiritual path and you've had that experience of touching that divinity within you, having an experience like that, which you can and will have if you earnestly practice these things, you will see them. The experiments are laid out clearly in the scriptures. If you want to experience the presence of God, not learn about it, not have somebody point at it, but if you want to experience God, the paths are well laid out. Yes, they're difficult, but because they're difficult doesn't make them untrue. It just means they're difficult. A math degree, it's difficult, but it's possible. And you get the degree and you know your math. So with the divine, it is the same. If you don't believe in God right now, no worries. Chances are it's the definition of God that's the problem, more than not believing in God, because God is love. What is there not to believe in love? Love is what we're seeking, the fullness and perfection of that ideal. And to know that is bliss and joy, and it's the highest goal of this life. So when you touch that, selfishness is appalling. The temporary nature of the world and the fetid enjoyments that it's able to give you that last for seconds at a time and require how many hours or days of investment on your part to just get that few seconds of pleasure. When you start realizing that within you is a pleasure and a contentment that's deeper and more profound than anything found in those sensual things, then you tend to not be so interested in them. It's not that you've tightened down the hatches so hard you've become this mean, bitter church lady, who's nasty to everyone. That's completely wrong thinking about the presence of God. It's that you've touched something so real and so wonderful that that's what you want. You don't want the rest of these things that don't last, because you found the one and only thing in this experience of life that is constant, unchanging, and doesn't diminish. Number 4 here. By this practice, the soul comes to such a knowledge of God that almost all her life is passed in making acts of love and of worship, of contrition and of trust, of thanks, of offering, of petition, and of all virtues. Sometimes indeed she, meaning the soul, seems engaged in one unceasing, endless act, for the soul is keeping herself continually in the divine presence. I know that only a few persons attain this state. It is a grace which God bestows on certain chosen souls, for this simple regard is an uncovenanted gift. But for the encouragement of those who wish to undertake this holy practice, I must say that he ordinarily gives it to those who are properly disposed, and if he does not give it, one can, with assistance of ordinary grace and by the practice of the presence of God, acquire at least a way and state of prayer which approaches very nearly to that of this simple regard. So he's really giving a great deal of encouragement there. That yes, this is a rare gift because you have to really want it. That's really the only thing that's blocking you. Do you want it? Have you learned the temporary nature of the world? Have you seen how it passes and leaves you only hungry for more? Have you learned that having one delicious piece of cake does nothing but make you want a second one, and locks an experience of a delicious piece of cake in the mind so that you're not content again without it? Have you witnessed that about the nature of this world? Have you seen that to be the condition of this world? Then lay this world aside. Turn away from the senses and go deeper within yourself, in the silence of self, beyond thought. It's not something you're going to think about or know in the mind. This experience is deeper than that, and it will take time to get there, but you can. The primary essentials for doing this are sincerity our earnestness, our love, and a truth, a knowledge of what is. You know? So those things together will bring you to this experience of God, which is not only possible, but is your inheritance. It's not something that we beg as beggars from God, like, oh, give me this, please give me this, please give me this. It's what we have always been. We are heirs. It is inevitable that we will see the divine. You know, the earliest scriptures, the first scriptures of the world, tell us quite clearly that all of us go home. It's just a matter of time. The more sincere and earnest you are in this quest, the more closely is the guarantee it will be yours, not because of the work that you do, but because of the grace it inspires. And by the knowledge of that love, you'll give yourself permission to let go of your ego, to let go of your personality, to let go of the wrong thinking that has kept you hungry and isolated, and teach you the ways of touching that within, which is unchanging, always content, always full, always blissful, and always in the presence of divine light, which is love, unconditioned, unlimited, ever free. So put your mind and heart to the task. Test these things to find out if they're true for yourself. No one's requesting you to believe anything. Simply take the chance, do the work, check the experiments, and see if you're not quite surprised with where you end up.